We get the best of both worlds. The fastest reflexes modern technology has to offer, onboard computer-assisted memory, and a lifetime of on-the-street law enforcement programming. It is my great pleasure to present to you Robocop.
This guy's really good.
He's not a guy, he's a machine.
Old Detroit has a cancer. Cancer is crime.
Let the woman go. You are under arrest.
You better back up, pal!
Your move, creep.
What are your prime directives?
You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to an attorney.
What is this shit?
Anything you say may be used against you.
He's a cyborg, you idiot! He recorded every word you said.
You're dead. We killed you.
His memory's admissible as evidence.
You're gonna have to kill it.
Get out of the car, for God's sake!
Robocop, the future of law enforcement.
Hey everyone, this is VHS Massacre Radio. I am your host, Tom Seymour.
And I'm your guest, Chris Ferry.
Yeah. Thanks for being with me, Chris Ferry, to talk about Robocop, the classic film directed by Paul Verhoeven, released in 1987. Of course, stars Peter Weller.
Spoiler alert, for those of you who haven't seen any iteration of the Robocop franchise, we got right off the bat, who we established pretty quickly is a good, decent cop, family guy, father, husband, in the line of duty, and from the time the film is made, future Detroit, the near future.
Yeah, yep.
And so Detroit is a pretty war-torn city, and there's a big corporation that has privatized the police and is starting to build Delta City, is that right? Build an entire, tear down old Detroit and build a brand new corporate city on top of it. And to that end, they are trying to militarize the police with robotics. And
wait, is this right? Although the writers have publicly stated that the film takes place in 2043?
It's clearly the future because of the technology we see, but Robocop hits the screen, and then we get right into the news reports. And the movie starts. And I don't think there's ever a time when they establish exactly when it is. 2043 seems
pretty far out there, yeah.
Too far from 1987 to me.
Yeah, that's wild. I guess this is from the writers have never publicly stated, but in their head, I guess it was marked as 2043. But anyway, that seems
well, in that
really
case,
weird.
they got a lot wrong. I was going to say if they're thinking it's 2015, 2020. One of my comments, and we're abandoning the synopsis for a moment, but one of my comments was a lot of it stands up really well. I mean, it's a very 80s movie.
Yep.
There's a lot of tropes and acting styles and things like hair and makeup and costume that are very 80s. But sociologically, what I really jived on this rewatching of it was corporate culture and corporate malfeasance.
Yes.
Which I always felt, it was a common thing in the 80s to have the corporate guy be the bad guy. In Alien, it's always the corporation that's the bad guy, right?
Yeah.
But it felt kind of conspiracy theory. Now, didn't seem remotely implausible that the head of the corporation himself would be directly guilty of murder and other sociopathic acts. It just didn't seem implausible to me in the slightest.
Yeah, RoboCop becomes, it's this wonderful satire, and it was this wonderful comedy of exaggeration, that is no longer an exaggeration
at the time.
None of it.
And it feels remarkably plausible now. You're just kind of like, yep.
Yeah, I mean everything from the Nukem board game, to the some of the commercials, like the sort of I'd buy that for $1, like the sort of presented idiotic television show meant purely to distract lowest common denominator to distract the public.
Glorifies misogyny and consumerism and
you got the corporate fascism and all these things, and it is so incredibly multi-layered that there's enough there, so you wouldn't think you'd need all these Christ allegories that end up popping up that I never saw in it initially. I had to do some reading on it, but I wanted to talk about Paul Verhoeven first for a second.
Sure.
So Robocop. You think of Robocop and Total Recall. So he initially started out in the Netherlands. He was born in 1938, and he was a child of. He was born just before World War II. And when the Nazis invaded, he would literally see downed Nazi planes, and he would go over to the wreckage and apparently stare into the faces of dead Nazis. And he had all this graphic imagery really early on in life. And though his earlier films like Turkish Delight with Rutger Hauer didn't reflect some of that, when he finally delved into Robocop, it became seriously graphic, and I think you cannot help but see his past in what he did with the Robocop.
Yes. Well, what struck me again, I remember I saw this as a kid because I was into sci-fi, and just what a great hook, Robocop. I mean, it's dynamite right off the bat. You're like, well, snakes on a plane. You know exactly what you're going to get.
Yep.
Robocop, and it delivers. But I remember as a kid being really scarred by the violence when he gets his hand blown off, and I mean it shook me. And that's still, in this watching, I was like, I didn't cringe in the same way because I knew it was coming, but I was like, damn, that is rough. And the villains are sadistic. And cool. They mock him. They laugh at his pain. They delight in the suffering that they cause. So in more recent media, we have seen a trend towards exploring the life of the anti-hero. I'm thinking of shows like The Wire, where you kind of get inside the drug mechanism and you realize they're not necessarily sadistic or evil people as much as people in a situation pursuing the paths that are open to them. Some of them are, but not all of them are, right?
Yeah.
Where in this picture, the bad guys are evil in a way that is deliberate and particularly malicious and sadistic.
Yeah, I think of I think it was the ED-209, the giant, the larger two-gun robot. When it errors out and ends up gutting down one of the board members, and it just go in the cuts that were released later, it just goes on and on, like it's just blowing. Meat starts to come out. It's very graphic, but the scene in particular that you were talking about, where they literally blow off his arm when they're killing Peter Weller's character. And that what you mentioned with them laughing, it made me think of sort of very contemporary culture where people now, when they see something horrible happen, they'll record it. And I don't mean like they're witness to something and they're trying to document it, but it's like their friend, falls down the stairs and breaks their arm, and they're laughing at this guy's compound fracture. So some of that stuff that frightens me, but it's nothing new. I think is the point, is that the technology is just unveiling how cruel people are to some degree, and Robocop does that. It's a fascinating backdrop. Paul Verhoeven referred to RoboCop at one point as an American Jesus.
Yeah.
And I really had to think about what that meant. The backdrop of a failing city is interesting, implying corruption within the city and then the corporate fascism. The underfunded police is an interesting angle. The police are not villains.
Particularly now with everything that's going on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Now it's but in the movie the police force is fairly diverse and they're just getting killed by the gangs essentially. It's a reflection more of that 80s culture.
Well, the privatization of the police force, which seemed incredibly implausible at the time. Like, come on, you never would privatize things like these social services. Well, of course, now it's de rigueur. So, it
private prisons. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
But interestingly, what I feel like is you privatize a prison, you privatize a hospital, you privatize what we think of a school as a public service, and the people who suffer from that are the people who are supposed to benefit from it. So you privatize the police, you think, well, the police aren't underfunded, although they probably suffer some too, but who really suffers are the people the police are supposed to protect, right? If you privatize a hospital, the service decreases because it becomes a profit-driven thing instead of a service-driven thing. Whereas in this... Yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, just to add to that point, same thing with elder care.
Yes.
Same thing with nursing homes.
Precisely. Out of sight, out of mind, and we'll cut corners, and the elders will suffer. But their loved ones wouldn't have dumped them here if they cared in the first place. Incredibly cynical, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah. I totally agree. You're in a zone, and it's interesting. I think that's where some of the Christ allegory sneaks in. Yeah. Is that what you have is corruption? It's sort of like the Pharisees and Pontius Pilate and all that, where Jesus is rebelling against a corrupt society. So you have the evil corporate, essentially owners of the city, and then you have the poor. I don't think they get into the mayor until the sequel. And I know the mayor. I mean, I know the second film is people think of it as a lesser film, but there was a black mayor character, and it was a pretty good presentation because he was incredibly powerless as the mayor of Detroit. He had almost no power, and
I need to go watch that. I don't have any interest in watching the third one again because I remember it being utterly unsatisfying.
It was not great.
I need to go back and watch Robocop 2, knowing that it's not the gem the original one is, but it does continue the plot line, right? It's still Murphy.
It has a lot to offer, and I know that they had this amazing sequel planned, and it changed, and to some degree the second one was rushed because everyone lost their mind for the original RoboCop.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, not to derail the conversation too much, but the odd thing is how violent this movie was, and there were toys, there were video games, it was really interesting.
Yeah, it was remarkably violent for a movie that, in many ways, is crafted like a kids movie, right? I mean, I know it was rated R or whatever it was rated, but the jokes and the setup of here's the bad guy and here's the bad guy's crew, and each one of the crew has their own particular. It's not quite so literal as this is the flamethrower guy and this is the one with knives, and but we each develop a thread, and then they each get their vengeance comeuppance as we escalate up to the boss.
Yep.
And it does feel very crafted in a deliberate way to be something that is going to, like a kid's show, that it's like, oh, well, bad guy number one, he's the guy that does this. Oh, but he gets it in this satisfying way. It's very primary colors in a certain way. And the concept of Robocop itself is very He-Man action figure oriented.
Yep, and very comic booky, and when when we begin the film, Peter Weller's character is this sort of like Murphy is this, sort of gun spinning hotshot cop, but only because his kid likes
Right.
the
For
show that he
wholesome
watches.
reasons, in a superficial way, in a Hollywood way, in a like this is fun way. Like he's an idealist, he's a good cop from a nice part of town, right? They make a joke about that he's like, "Oh, you're from the other side. Like we work here. Like you're down here in the tough part."
Yeah, and you get the sense that like perhaps he had some choice over coming to the other side of the tracks, or however you want to put it. So his partner is Nancy Allen, who plays Lewis, and Lewis, to some degree, is she sort of can hang with the other police officers. It's in regard to viewing this as a Christian allegory. Maybe she is sort of the Mary Magdalene type because she's kind of like down and dirty and she's tough. And that may be drawing a little far, but
I think, if you talk to the filmmaker about it, and he describes his own work as an American Christ allegory, he has the right to do that. I don't see it in this. Like, if you look at The Matrix, there's a Christ allegory. I mean, the guy sacrifices himself. He's godlike. He's unique. He sacrifices himself for the good of everyone else. I mean,
okay,
there you go. But I didn't see any hero that basically does the right thing and becomes a sacrifice.
Well, okay, let me give you this is my sort of summary on it. Okay, this may take a minute, so bear with me and jump in where you want. But so Murphy's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to clean up the streets. When he is killed so mercilessly by the gang, them cackling and joking, is very much like the Roman soldiers when they crucified Christ. And people see that the fact that Murphy's hand was blown off is the stigmata, and then he actually dies. And when he's died, he dies. He's risen. He's brought back to life as this Robocop who is then there to sort of push back against the corruption of the city. But once you start getting into that, we read an article, I think it was, I don't know if it was on Gizmodo or something like that,
Sure.
But it talked about at that point it becomes sort of spot the symbolism that you want. But I do think that there's a point where he's literally speared through the chest.
Yep. Right near the end. Yeah. Yep.
Where and the like the spear of destiny, and then a peculiar detail is that although they are in water, which seems to be of varying depth, him as he's represented as something like a 400-pound machine or something like that. And he does seem to walk literally walking on the water, and
I didn't catch that.
That's
interesting.
Yeah, so walking on the water at the end of the film, and at the end does weed out the corruption. But you could say that the American part of it is the city, the fact that it's sort of the city of Detroit. It's this RoboCop. It is so American, and it's. You draw in the industrial aspect of America. RoboCop himself is a machine. Yeah. The cars are manufactured there. So and
he's a product.
He's a product, yeah. And even the cars, the Detroit cars, it was the the SUX?
SUX, 6000 SUX.
yeah. So things like that, I do see it there personally. I don't think that.
I don't dispute it. I just don't. I don't feel like the movie. Look, if it fuels him to make a better movie, great. And I can see it. Yeah, I just think there's other movies where it's more on the nose, and I think that if that was like his subtext, then yeah, that made the character stronger and that made the storytelling more interesting. But the movie as a whole doesn't seem to be painting a Christ picture as much as it is selling popcorn. The movie as a whole does a great job of butts and seats with the guy who gets the toxic waste and then he gets splattered. I mean, there's a lot of that summer blockbuster stuff. And if the Christ imagery helps the director anchor that and make this core story and core character more meaningful, fantastic. I just, when watching the movie, I'm kind of like, okay. And if the interview was like, well, as you see in the film, of course, he is Christ. I'm like, whatever you say, Paul. That's fine. It was a great movie. I enjoyed it. You know?
Well, I think in learning more about this stuff, and I think maybe it's like this. Even if I'm watching it and I don't consciously track the fact that there's some Christian allegory within it, it's a subconscious thing that I might sense in the fact that the certain scenes may resonate stronger with me without even me really knowing.
Yeah.
Like him being, his hand shot off and then him dying and then him coming back. Like, those are very simple story elements, but they probably gave me a sense, even the first time watching it, that although this is new and wonderful, there's a mild sense of familiarity. And I think...
Relatability.
Relatability.
To which we can relate to that.
Yeah, I think so, yeah. So I think in that sense it might function on a very subtle level. Things maybe just connect a bit more than maybe they wouldn't have if it wasn't maybe ordered in the right way or certain symbolism wasn't used. But beyond that, especially when he gets speared, like the look on his face and the way it goes down.
Yeah.
But Peter Weller's performance is absolutely incredible. Apparently, he trained with the best mimes in the world.
Interesting, yeah.
And they were doing test shoots, and I guess originally the outfit had very little room for movement, and I guess they shot some stuff, and it just looked horrible. Like it looked like a joke.
Stiff.
Like he would turn his head, and the helmet wouldn't turn with his head. You know what I mean? And
wouldn't let him. Yeah.
So they managed to rip out all the foam underneath. You see like the Robocop now, if you look like under his armpit, it's more like black material. There's a few things they do.
Yeah.
So they stripped it down, and the mime came in, and they said the only way this can work is if you're doing it like you're doing the robot, like it's a mechanical.
You perform the robot. We don't restrict you with a restrictive outfit. We give you a fluid outfit, and we let the robot be your performance.
Yeah, and they had all, and the guy had all sorts of techniques. Say, like, okay, when you turn, your chest turns first, and then your head.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's just wonderful.
It's so great. There was one shot I remember, and it might be where he's lying down or he's talking to his partner, but it's clear that what's supposed to be below his face, the mechanism of his throat and neck, it's clear in that one shot, if you're looking at it, that it's just an outfit, that it's just like a Halloween costume. It's just soft rubber instead of the sort of, it's supposed to look like metallic kind of.
Which scene is that?
It's in the warehouse in the second or maybe end of Act 2 before they show up and shoot out. And he's either lying in the water after it's all gone down, or he's sitting. It's after he takes off his face mask.
Okay.
And I just noticed, I was just letting my eyes kind of explore the costume out of curiosity, and I noticed he moved in a way that the thing betrayed itself as being like
plastic or something.
Yeah, and you're watching his performance, which is riveting, so you're not, but I'd seen it a number of times at this point, and I was just taking it all in, and I'm like, oh yeah, they gave him a lot of movement room, and it probably, if they'd have built that initially, it was heavy.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I think supposedly there is some footage before they redid the suit of it. So I wonder if that's not the footage. And it was funny though. Everyone was like, when they tore the suit apart and rebuilt it, and Peter Weller's doing this mime thing. Peter Weller's like, "This is shit. It's not going to work. This is a joke." And the director, Paul Verhoeven was like, "Oh, this is terrible. It looks like crap." And so the mime trained him perfect, and then they did test shots and they sent it to the producer, and the mime said, "Look, don't. Paul's Dutch. He's depressed. He goes, all Dutch people are depressed. He's like, you're in your head too much. It looks great, And I guess they got to a point where they said Peter Weller figured out that his performance is like he is like a beast contained within the suit, and the robotic part is what is forcing him to operate the way he is. Anyway, he had a whole mentality to it, but it's just a beautiful performance.
If you go back and watch it, it's really something. There's times when he's like walks into I guess it's the drug or cocaine factory, and it's the whole factory full of people on multiple levels, all firing weapons at him. And he's just one at a time targeting different people and like shooting ducks off of or tin cans, shooting them down. And there starts to be some flair in it, right?
Yep.
There's a kind of a thing he does. He opens the other arm out, and it's very gunslinger, and you get to see the human who learned how to twirl his gun to please his son, starting to enjoy the power of this suit, the invulnerability of this suit. And it's a very subtle thing, but it's pervasive through, and he does so much with his eyes. It's great when he gets to take the thing off and we get to see his face again.
Oh yeah, it's so sad,
It's really sad.
He'll say one or two words, and or the scene with his wife is like, "Touch my skin, it's cold." Yeah, and then there's another scene where they're going through his protocols. When his wife shows up, and just overly hurtful. The guy's like, "Do you think you could ever be a husband to her?" And he just says, he's like, "No." And the way he says no is it's a lot. Like he's doing a lot with the lines,
Yeah. Well, he's talking to his partner, and he says, "I feel them, but I can't remember them."
Yeah.
And it's really, really heartbreaking because it's a complicated concept. Like, there's the movie's a lot of fun, and I think it's very successful, but it opens up a lot of questions that it doesn't delve into as much. Like, so say he's Christ, he sacrifices himself in the line of duty for the greater good. He rises again from the dead in this new form. And the movie touches on these issues of like, well, he's a guy, he's starting to remember, he dreams, but he's legally property of this corporation now. What is he? He can think and feel like a person, but he's not legally a person.
There's something odd about it that feels true, right? Like there's something, people talk about fiction. You can say, well, fiction is not true, but you could say fiction is distilled truth. You could say fiction is more true sometimes than reality.
Right. And
as to why Robocop feels true so often, given how ridiculous it is, it's a bit of a mystery to me, I guess.
Yeah. One thing I remember from the third movie that stayed with me, that I actually liked conceptually about the third movie, is that they have tried it with many other subjects, all of whom self-terminate.
Yes.
Right? Because they can't take it. So that this first guy out of the box is this sort of unique individual because, well, maybe he's the Christ figure. I don't know. But it doesn't work with just anyone, right? It takes a special, maybe unique kind of person And I think in the third one they find some drug addict megalomaniac that they make it work sort of with.
Oh
but-
yeah, that's the second. That's the second one.
Oh,
yeah.
that's RoboCop 2.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah.
Three is like a cyber ninja. It's just they kind of go off the rails with it.
I don't even remember that. Then.
It's also not Peter Weller, so then it's like, but no, that yeah. There's a scene where they go. It's very sort of camp, but they go through derivations of RoboCop where people are like ripping their heads off, because they don't. When they are aware of what they are, they terminate. Like you said, very fascinating. So yeah, but back, in that way, two has some good things to offer, man. I'm not saying it's on the level, but the very thing that you're talking about, they don't go into that much in the first one. So one and two are very nice unit,
Well, the first one is it's an action movie, I think, first and foremost, but there's lots of elements of comedy. It's very, very graphic. So there's even some horror elements to it.
Yeah.
It's not primarily a think piece. It's not a Blade Runner that really explores the society, and the machinations of what life is like in different strata. It's not world building. It's just like, oh, it's Detroit, a lot of crime, it's the future. Here we go. Corporations are corrupt. You all know that, but it's gotten really bad. And we got a good cop, and now he's a robot cop.
Yeah, yeah.
And it raises these questions, I think, through the subtlety, the structuring of the idea and the storytelling and the performances. But it doesn't ever delve into them. We don't get soulful monologues about what it's like to be the first cyborg. Or, there's none of that introspective. There's just little scenes to establish how lonely and sad he feels, having lost his family.
Yeah.
Not now that I'm not a man anymore. You don't get a lot of that. Just enough to make it clear.
Yeah. Yeah. So I love the film. I think it's essentially a perfect film. And the even the stop motion stuff with the robots. Some of the robots are animated through stop motion, which I just watched a video on it. Part of the reason why stop motion at that point didn't always feel as realistic as possible, which
Right.
I'm fine with. I think it's still feels like a physical robot within a space, and the fact that it is a robot helps. But what happens is when you're using that, you're sort of emulating shutter speed.
Yeah.
So if you think of like high shutter speed would be used for sports. So if you throw a football, it would look stoppy and choppy, but the football would be clear.
Right.
And a lower shutter speed, it would be smooth, but the football will be blurry.
Right.
So what you have is stop motion looks like high shutter speed, very stoppy, but usually they're put in an environment where the shutter speed is on the cinema camera, the shutter angle is different.
Yeah.
So I never heard it described that way, but it was. I just thought it was fascinating.
It's stitched together really well. You've got Peter Weller in the suit doing the robotics as a performance.
Yep.
Which is really, in my mind, a kind of puppetry. And then you've got the Ed 209, which is stop motion, which is, in my mind, also a kind of puppetry. It's a model that you're animating by moving it incrementally. And you get character comes into it that way. Like when it gets blown up and it falls down, and then you see the foot's up in the air and one of the little toes goes.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a twitchy. It's a great little. It doesn't forward the story. It's just personality.
Oh, that's right. They called it the Ed 209. I was calling it the ED 209. It's Ed 209. Yeah.
Ed 209. But it gives personality to this thing that is a nemesis. So you look at it, it's like Yoda, right?
Yeah.
Which is superior, puppet Yoda or CGI Yoda. Hands down, puppet Yoda. Hands down.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I don't know why exactly, but our minds are more willing to. There's just something human, even in the stop motion and the claymation of Clash of the Titans. When a person is driving it, there's a personality that comes through. When a person is computer animating it, something gets lost in the machine. It can be spectacular and it can be inventive, but I'm trying to think of a purely CGI scene I've seen that actually evoked an emotional response.
I mean,
beyond just being like, "Whoa, that was cool," or "Look at that design."
It's only when, really good motion capture like Gollum from Lord of the Rings, that kind of works.
But that's a human performance. That's a human performance. It's
Oh,
a
yeah.
guy in a dot suit. So they
Yeah.
put Robocop as a guy in a plastic suit. Gollum is a guy in a digital suit.
Yeah,
But
fair enough.
You don't have
yeah.
Andy Serkis. You don't have Gollum. You know what I mean? You could have gotten a guy in to do. You could have gotten Andy in to do
That's
voice
that's true.
acting, and
Yeah.
they just completely computer generated. Would not have landed in the same way.
Yeah, it's funny. In The Irishman, they were using CGI to de-age some of the cast.
Yeah, a lot of them.
And
a lot.
A lot of
It
and
was distracting.
Scorsese referred to it as digital makeup, and I thought that was fascinating.
It was interesting.
Because he was saying, look, I mean, it's not when you see prosthetic makeup that it looks that great. I mean, let's be honest. Even what was that Churchill movie with Gary Oldman?
Right.
I mean, it looked makeup-y. It did. Yeah. It looked like a guy in makeup. And for some reason, we're fine with that.
It does take me out of it.
Yeah.
It takes me out of it. It takes me out of it when I see someone's fake beard and the beard doesn't look real. It takes me out of it. I'm not saying it ruins the movie for me, but I notice it.
I noticed it. There's the movie in The Big Short, and it was like 1,000 bad wigs, like including like Brad Pitt and the whole rest of the cast. I was like, what the fuck is going on here?
Right. And you wonder if somehow the filmmaker's trying to make a point with it. I'm like, you watch the dailies. You don't see this? This is acceptable to you?
You're right, yeah.
Like you put a fake beard on someone to make it look like they have a beard. If they're giving you an A-lister performance and I'm not paying attention because I'm looking at how bad the beard is, that's a fail. Fix
a problem,
that.
yeah.
You got to reshoot that.
Well, that was the problem with Peter Jackson's The Hobbit because I saw it in the theaters and they were projecting at 48 frames a second.
Oh yeah.
Which looks like electronic news.
Yeah.
And so Gandalf looked like a guy dressed up as a wizard rather than a wizard.
The dwarves all had fake noses and you could just see it.
It just looked terrible.
I was so disappointed by that because I saw it in the high def, and then I saw it again at my local theater in my hometown when I went home to visit my parents for Christmas. And at that time, it wasn't projected in digital. It was just stepped on like it was a film projector.
Yeah.
And it looked gorgeous. It looked like, the Middle Earth you'd expect it to look like. It was buttery, and the down-resing of it spackled over all of that. You stopped looking at Gimli's nose, and you started to listen to what Gimli was saying.
But, Yep. Yeah, so, it's very fascinating the different utilities people have now to transform, from prosthetics to CGI, but I think RoboCop still holds up. I mean, there are things about it that are dated, but those become endearing parts
Kinda
of
charming,
history. It's a portal into a specific time.
You know what it made me think of? Watching it. You ever had this sort of gourmet popcorn that it's got all kinds of stuff in it? Like it's popcorn as the base, but there's like chocolate drizzled into it, and there's caramel drizzled into it, and there's peanuts. And there's just a lot going on. It's a bunch of different stuff in a bowl, but somehow, this you take a little bite and you're like, oh, that's one thing, and then you take another little bite and you're like, that's a totally different thing. But somehow the net experience of getting to the bottom of that bowl is really satisfying and kind of multifaceted, and it all kind of plays well together. And that's what I felt about rewatching this movie. Is there's some laughable effects and there's some dated stuff, but there's some timeless tropes and some really ahead of their time concepts that stand up today, and at the end of the thing, you go with it, which is huge. That's hard to do in a movie.
Yeah.
And, you know, sometimes it feels like the movie is illustrating that this is a society that glorifies mindless violence, while the movie you're watching is glorifying mindless violence. You know, it does the thing it points a finger at.
Yep.
And it gets away with it because sometimes it is the thing, sometimes it's not the thing, but it's pointing at it. It makes you think, but it also lets you stop thinking.
Yeah, well, it is interesting, right? It's so over the top that you recoil. And, you know, there are movies like that. Like Unforgiven is a movie about...
Right.
It's a anti-violence movie is what it is.
But it's very violent.
But it's very violent.
The end of it is... That's a masterful movie.
Yeah, oh yeah. So that is interesting. Yeah, I think it's so gratuitous that it's just like, see, you know, like this is too much. But anyway, yeah. So I think RoboCop 1 and 2 is an amazing film to revisit.
I'm going to watch number 2 tonight. Now that you say that, I want to go back and see the thing again.
Yeah, I think it's worth a watch. You mind if I go into some VHS Massacre 2 announcements?
Go for it.
Some good news. This Saturday, there's going to be a virtual screening. You can find out more information at the undergroundindiefilmfestival.com. That's undergroundindiefilmfestival.com. They're doing some kind of virtual screening on Saturday, which is June the 13th. So they'll be posting an announcement at some point. Also, too, I wanted to tell everyone who might be of interest. The 41st Annual Telly Awards was held last week, and VHS Massacre 2 won 2 Telly Awards. Yay. One in the Best Documentary category and one in the Best Low Budget Project category.
It's really great. You guys should check it out. It's worth a watch.
Thanks, man. And more festival announcements to date. There was HorrorCon UK, which is a very large convention in England, is doing they're going to convert to a virtual film festival. So there'll be a screening of that, which I'll look up, and I'll find out information about that. And then also, too, Horror Hound Magazine just did a review of VHS Massacre 2, and they really liked it. There was a really cool quote. Let me bring that up. They said it was, VHS Massacre 2 is infused with nostalgia, humor, and passion, without a doubt worth watching. And that's by this guy, J.K. from Horror Hound. Anyway.
I concur. That's a great summary. I concur.
Thanks, bro. I here's the thing, like, I haven't been in Horror Hound since maybe, I don't know, 2008 with some of the horror films we used to do. So Horror Hound is one of the major, the top 3 horror magazines. So the top 3 are like Rue Morgue, Fangoria, and Horror Hound. And so the fact that they reviewed it and they actually liked it, it's like, oh man, this is, anyway, I'm really happy about it. So, yeah, that's about it for announcements. What about you, Chris Ferry? You got anything going on creatively?
Just trying to make it through quarantine. Got my fancy mic set up here. You know, I'm not sure if this is airworthy or not, but friend of the podcast, Chris Huddleston, is an old school friend of mine. He and I are talking about maybe having a relatively conversation at some increment, where maybe we can add to your channel here and put some more content up for people.
That would be amazing. That would be awesome.
He's got some spectacular ideas. Turned out it wasn't COVID, thank goodness, but I thought I had it for a while. I was really sick. And now that I'm back in the pink, I'm going to pick up that ball with him, and we'll see where it goes.
Oh, man, I can't wait to see what you do. And, yeah, that would be awesome. That would be awesome to have you on the VHS Massacre 2 network, we'll call it.
Thanks.
So, yeah, okay. Well, anyway, thanks so much, Chris, for being part of it. And, yeah, we'll see you guys next time.
Bye-bye.